Tales from the Rails. Discovering the Stockton and Darlington Railway. The railway that got the world on track.
Hello and welcome to our 12th and final Tales from the Rails, our monthly podcast on the Stockton and Darlington Railway, the railway that got the world on track. We agreed to run 12 podcasts through 2024 in preparation for the 200th anniversary in 2025. Although we've also discussed doing a one-off, maybe, sometime in 2025 during the S&DR 200 Festival Fringe, of which more later.
It's the aim of the Friends of the S&DR to raise awareness and understanding of the significance of our heritage in a variety of different ways, and these podcasts were part of that goal. We hope you have found them interesting. Because this is our last official podcast, we are calling this episode The End of the Line.
My name is Caroline Hardie. I'm an archaeologist, an author, the editor and a trustee for the charity, the Friends of the Stockton and Darlington Railway.
My name is Archie MacKay. I'm managing editor of South Western News, a small independent publisher of 4 community newspapers, including the Shildon and District Town Crier, produced right here in the cradle of the railways.
And my name is Angela Pickering. I am a friend of the Stockton and Darlington Railway, and I'm also a volunteer at Tanfield Railway, on and off the footplate. So this week on Tales from the Rails, we are talking about endings. In particular, accidents, tragic endings and maimings on the railway, because we wanted to end on a high note. If you are squeamish about railway accidents, perhaps give this podcast a miss.
Our stars of the S&DR this month is the Greener family of Italy, Toft Hill, and the Black Boy branch.
And as an extra treat, Archie has gathered together what we call fails from the rails, where we make mistakes and they get edited out. It's a short section, obviously, because we are, of course, pretty near being perfect.
Tales from the Rails. This podcast is brought to you by the Friends of the Stockton and Darlington Railway, a registered charity set up to safeguard and promote the heritage of the railway that got the world on track. You can join us by visiting our website at www.str1825.org.uk.
Accidents, death and disfigurement were the unintended consequences of regular high-speed rail travel available for anyone to use. Perhaps the best-known early railway fatality was at the opening of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway in 1830, when the Right Honourable William Huskisson MP was struck down by rocket. His demise is commonly known as the world's first widely reported railway passenger casualty, widely reported being the operative word, because truth be told, the Stockton and Darlington Railway was quietly killing and maiming people long before the death of Huskisson, although the victims of the S&DR were of a lower status and less newsworthy. We can't think of a single senior politician that we managed to kill off, just hard-working folks, beggars, children, distracted passers-by, and quite a few pigs and horses.
But first, let's acknowledge that there were railways before the S&DR, although they were not what we would consider to be the start of the modern railway. This means that people have been maimed and killed by railways long before the work started on the S&DR, and most of these are unrecorded. One of the earliest fatalities occurred on December the 5th, 1821, when a carpenter, David Brooke, was walking home from Leeds along the Middleton Railway in a blinding sleet storm. He failed to see or hear an approaching train of coal wagons drawn by one of the Blenkinsop Murray engines and was fatally injured.
But even before that, on the same railway, in February 1813, John Bruce, aged 13, was running alongside the track when he stumbled and fell beneath the wheels. The teenager may well be the world's first steam railway fatality, and so we can say that the Middleton Railway is truly pioneering in the art of killing people.
There were also ghastly industrial accidents that wiped out large numbers of people at once. On July the 31st, 1815, on the New Bottle Wagonway, the steam horse, as it was called, designed in Derbyshire by William Brunton, exploded on the opening day at Philadelphia.
Upwards of 50 persons, men and children, we lament to say, have been wounded or scalded by the destructive accident, said the Durham County Advertiser. 3 persons have already died. William Sharp, the manager of the engine, who was blown to a considerable distance and most dreadfully mangled, William Nesbitt, one of the overmen of the colliery, and John Holmes, a pit boy.
The toll rose to about 16 dead with around 40 injured, which meant that the New Bottle Wagonway disaster was not surpassed in its awfulness for more than 25 years. When carriages behind a derailed locomotive at Versailles in France in 1842 caught fire and up to 200 people died, appallingly, locked compartment doors prevented passengers from escaping. But back to the Stockton and Darlington Railway as the start of the modern railway from 1825.
OK, so let's start with death during construction works. The construction of the railway itself was to lead to the demise of one Thomas Lamb, aged 37, whose death was reported in the Durham County Advertiser on the 21st of February 1824. He was killed by earth and stones falling while he was working in a cutting near Bristleton, and he left behind a wife and small family, quote, to lament his loss. Other members of the Lamb family continued to work at the Bristleton incline long after it became operational.
And there were opening day demises. The S&DR can't compete with the Liverpool and Manchester Railway for opening day accidents, but perhaps we should take time to remember the unfortunate waggoner who had his foot run over at Goospool on the opening day. The Durham County Advertiser reported that he was a keelman called John Stevens. Many former keelmen were employed by the railway. He was clinging to the waggon in front of the experiment passenger coach, which was carrying the railway directors, when at Goospool, now where Teesside Airport is near Middleton St George, he lost his hold. He slipped from the waggon onto the track.
One of the wheels of the coach passed over one of his feet, which was dreadfully crushed, said the Advertiser, and it is believed amputation must be resorted to save his life. In a time with no antibiotics, no general anaesthetic, and bearing in mind just how many little bones are in a foot, it is entirely possible that John Stevens died of his injuries sometime later, or at best was left with life-altering injuries and a bad limp. There are, however, no records of his burial in the north of England in 1825, so I suspect he survived.
And then there were operational deaths of bypasses. In our last podcast on Women of the S&DR, we mentioned a dreadful young death only 7 days after the opening of the S&DR.
A boy of the name George Graham was killed on the new railway at Darlington on Tuesday last by a waggon passing over his body. That was reported in the Durham Chronicle, 8th of October, 1825.
Based on research by one of our members, Brendan Boyle, George was probably about 12 to 13 years old and lived in Darlington. That makes young George the world's first reported fatality on an operational public steam-powered railway line.
Only 2 months later, George's father, also called George, was killed in a road accident near Catterick, leaving his wife with 9 other children. Again, to lament his untimely end. He was 37 years old.
You can read about both Georges in an article by Brendan Boyle in the July 2018 issue of the Friends journal The Globe, available from our website.
Another early railway death is one we also discussed in our last podcast. On March the 5th, 1827, the rector of Eaglescliff, John Brewster, recorded that he'd buried a female, name unknown, whose age was past 40 and who had been killed by the steam machine on the railway. This unfortunate female was American, she was blind, and she was a beggar. Was she the first woman to be killed by the S&DR? Possibly.
Then there were the drivers of death. Being in control of a steam engine is a dangerous job. The early operational years of the S&DR saw exploding engines but also drivers happy to drive at thrilling speeds likely to result in injury.
As early as July 1827, Thomas Story, the line's civil engineering superintendent, reported to the railway subcommittee, "Enginemen run the wagons into the new Staithway at Stockton with a very great velocity, to the danger and risk of the company's property."
In October 1827, the serious damage caused by No. 2 locomotive at Stockton led to the discharge of an unnamed fireman. The railway subcommittee directed that a fine of 10 shillings be imposed upon any engineman who shall dare to fasten down the safety valve when the engine is at rest, and the same penalty if the valves be not locked every night. This warning was to go unheeded by a few and would have fatal consequences.
Also in October 1827, No. 1's unnamed fireman got himself lame, and he had to be replaced on the 26th of that month by a member of Hackworth's team at Shildon Workshops, G. Jermison. It's not clear if the fireman's lameness was a result of a railway accident.
On the 21st December 1827, James Stevenson, brother of George, was joined on No. 1 by John Cree, perhaps for a period of training before Cree took over from James as the locomotive's engine man. But only a few weeks before, Cree had been fined 10 shillings for not greasing the coal wagons on his own train.
On March the 19th, 1828, the S&R's second locomotive, Hope, blew up at Timpasture. It blew its fireman, John Gillespie, nearly 22 metres, that's 24 yards, through the air, and he died of his injuries. His death was reported in the Durham County Advertiser.
On Wednesday the 19th instant, a serious accident occurred at Simpastures near Aycliffe in consequence of the bursting of the boiler of one of the locomotive engines employed by the Stockton and Darlington Railway, by which a man named John Gillespie was blown over a hedge to a considerable distance and was so severely injured as to occasion his death the following day, and another so much scalded that little hope is entertained of his recovery. An inquest was held before the same coroner on Saturday on view of the body of Gillespie, and a verdict of accidental death returned by the jury.
The S&R committee met on the 21st March, just 2 days later, and the following is presumably a consequence of this accident.
Accident by a locomotive engine. Report having been made that a lamentable accident has occurred from the blowing up of one of the locomotive engines. Resolved that the person having the care of the engine on that occasion be ordered to attend this committee at its next sitting for the purpose of examination as to the cause of the said catastrophe. Resolved that a penalty of 10 shillings be laid upon such men having the care of any one of the company's locomotive engines who shall dare absent himself from the engine in the absence of an approved fireman whenever there is fire under the grates. Resolved that in future the engines belonging to this company be tested every 4 months at Shildon by a pressure of water at least 10 pounds over and above the maximum allowed by the safety valve.
Despite this resolution, less than 4 months later, on July the 1st, 1828, at the same spot, locomotion No. 1 also blew up and so wounded its driver, John Cree, that he died 2 days later and was buried in St. Helen, Auckland. Timothy Hackworth recorded the incident in his notebook.
July 1st, 1828, John Cree, going down the line, No. 1 locomotive at Aycliffe Lane. While getting water, the engine exploded near 1 o'clock. He died on the 3rd at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Cree's water pumper at Hyington, Edward Turnbull, was so badly burned by locomotion in the explosion that his face was stained and scarred with black speckles by the accident. Edward was presumably related to Matthew Turnbull, the landlord, station master at Hyington Station from 1827.
To give this a more human feel, John Cree was only aged 23 when he was killed. He had been married less than 7 weeks to Anne Waite. They had got married in St. Cuthbert's Church in Darlington. This left newlywed Anne with a funeral bill and no means of support, but a committee meeting on the 11th of July 1828, agreed a
donation for J. Cree's widow. Resolved the sum of £10 be given to T. Story for the widow of John Cree for liquidating the debt of his funeral and a donation for her benefit. It was also agreed to pay the coroner's charges for holding inquests and the deodans levied on the company by the jury.
Now, we've come across deodans before. This is a fine on objects that have caused human death or harm. It's a law that goes back to the 11th century, but was removed from statute in 1846. Clearly, the object can't pay the fine, but the owners have to, or they forfeit it. Both accidents resulting in the deaths of John Gillespie and John Cree were due to the same cause, the carelessness of the engineman in allowing the weights of the safety valves, which had been fixed down during the journey, to remain in that position while the engine was at rest. As pressure increased, the engine became a bomb. The inquest held on the 4th of July 1828 into Cree's death found that it was a result of gross negligence on the part of the sufferer. That's a rather brutal way of saying it was his own fault.
2 engines were taken out of action within a few weeks of each other as a result of these accidents, and another, number 7, was already out of action, so more horses had to be used along the line instead of locomotives, while Hackworth set about rebuilding the engines. When locomotion number 1 returned to active duty, she would look very different, with 2 funnels at her rear end instead of 1 at the front.
But meanwhile, there was some speculation, especially amongst those responsible for building the Liverpool and Manchester line, that locomotives were too dangerous to use. The Liverpool Mercury of the 18th of July 1828 speculated,
should the dreadful accidents which have recently occurred from explosions lead to the abandonment of the locomotive engine? On the 5th of July 1828, the Durham Chronicle reported of a melancholy death. On Tuesday last, as one of the locomotive engines was proceeding along the Stockton and Darlington Railway, the boiler burst and 2 men were so dreadfully scalded that their lives are despaired of. I suspect this is actually a misreporting of the earlier explosions rather than additional ones.
Careless driving causes accidents. In April 1830, number 1 engine was involved in a collision with some wagons, causing an inquiry to be held by the directors. Although James Stevenson was released from being fined for the incident, he was fined 20 shillings for neglect in not ensuring that a cowl, that's a fender for slowing engines down, had been fitted to the engine, which might have reduced the extent of the damage.
Death of a stationary steam engine man. John Greener was the engine man at Etherley Incline. He lived there with his family and was responsible for keeping the incline moving, and that meant keeping the stationary steam engine running so it could haul wagons up and down the hill.
He was killed at 8 in the morning on the 20th of February 1843 when he fell under one of the beams of the engine at Etherley while it was in motion. His death certificate recorded the cause of death as accidentally killed by a steam engine. His death was reported in the press, albeit with a number of errors, including his wrong name and age. They said he was on top of a ladder dressing the engine which was going at the time. When taken out, he was dead. A coroner's inquest was held and a verdict returned of accidental death.
He was 53 years old and had been an engineman there since 1826, when he had taken over the post from his brother Thomas, who had left to work with George Stephenson and John Dixon on the Liverpool and Manchester Railway.
John's grave is in St Helen's Churchyard in St Helen, Auckland, and it was recently cleared of brambles and exposed by volunteers so that the gravestone can now be seen. He shared the plot with his wife, Elizabeth, who had died in 1833, incidentally from that other dangerous profession, childbirth.
The S&AR closed the Etherley Incline about the same time as John's death. This wasn't entirely due to the death of John, but it was becoming redundant anyway, thanks to the company building the Shildon Tunnel, which opened in January 1842, and which would bypass the incline and create a more efficient route, less prone to bottlenecks.
So next time you are walking along Etherley Incline, spare a thought for John Greener and also Elizabeth, killed while giving birth to their daughter, also called Elizabeth.
Misreporting of accidents.
The Hagerleases branch line of the S&AR opened in 1830 in 2 phases. The second opening was on the 2nd of October, and by then railway accidents were on everyone's minds. Why? Because only a few weeks earlier, during the Liverpool and Manchester's opening day on the 15th of September, Huskisson had been killed. Consequently, the opening day speeches at the Hagerleases branch were an opportunity to set the record straight.
To commemorate the opening, there was a gathering at the offices of the Butterknowle and Coakley collieries belonging to Reverend Prattman. Prattman provided the usual cold collation available at such events and took the opportunity to express concern about the number of accidents on railways.
Joseph Pease responded with a speech correcting some of the erroneous information that had been spread about accidents on the S&R after the death of Huskisson. This included mistaken figures in the press, suggesting that the S&R had suffered 50 casualties instead of 15.
Imagine the press getting something wrong.
However, it's clear that the S&R were not keeping terribly accurate records about accidents anyway. In 1839, the S&R put together a list of serious accidents from 1825 for the Board of Trade. It's a hard-going list, not chronological and with a lot of blank spaces and crossing outs, all of which suggests the incidents were hastily gathered from scraps of paper left in cupboard drawers and old files. Many have no dates or names. So thank you to George Smith, who took photos of the 2 pages now residing at the National Archive. I've quickly gone through the list so we can get a feel for what was the nature of serious accidents on the railway and who were they happening to. Let's do what we can to remember these pioneering victims of railway disasters.
Thomas Peatham of Darlington jammed against Wesso Bridge by an engine while driving horse wagons.
Thomas Musgrave of Darlington, killed by Adelaide engine, Wesso Bridge, while labouring for masons.
An unnamed traveller whilst lighting his pipe at the Wilberforce, Hopetown.
Run over by Adelaide, Redhall.
Thomas Surthwaite of Darlington, run over by Wilberforce at Houghton Lane, Deodand £20.
Joseph Allen of Darlington, run over by horse coach at Redhall Level Crossing.
In 1837, Mr. Lister at Darlington, run over at Darlington Depot by loaded wagons. There are 3 entries for this, one of which appears to be a child, William, and there is a reference to his wife, possibly as a beneficiary of compensation, but it is confused.
John Carter, near Early Nook, killed near Skerne Bridge. He was a waggoner from Richmond.
3 unnamed people killed near Newport by coal wagons.
A farmer in a state of intoxication, killed crossing Thornaby Lane.
A boy waiting on a coach to Darlington, killed by a coal wagon at Stockton.
A child killed by wagons at Chapel Row.
June 30th, 1826, Mr. Glass of Etherley was killed by wagons.
30th October 1830, George English, run over by wagon which threw him off by striking a switch point at Evenwood Bridge.
10th of February 1831, Thomas Johnson, Etherley, killed by the laden wagons when coming down Etherley Incline.
23rd of February 1832, John Buick jammed between engine and wagons near Redhall.
October 1829, Gillespie, by bursting of locomotion, engine man. We think this is a misrepresentation of John Gillespie's death in 1828.
John Peacock, leader, Fighting Cocks, by coal wagon at Fighting Cocks.
1834, James Cleasby, his engine thrown off the way, he fell under it.
25th April 1838, John Ray, run over by accident by the Swift coach near Stockton, employed by Doughty of Yarm.
14th of December 1838, James Brogan, run over and had leg broken near Yarm branch by some wagons.
25th of February 1839, Thomas Scooton Middlesbrough by a coal wagon at depots.
And under that, a child is listed as being killed at Middlesbrough Station.
1839, Granger Hornsby, guard of merchandise train.
William Howgill, Darlington, wagons on Hagerleases branch.
Joseph Musgrove, at West Hartburn, by carriages, wagons, running over him whilst greasing them. George Langstaff, manager.
Lyle, at Oak Tree, by gravel wagons running over him.
An unnamed tinker, run over by 2 engines in their wagons when coming along the way near Horton Lane.
William Laidler, fireman, throwing something, we can't read what it is, and fell off the Darlington engine and was run over.
Unnamed person run over by Darlington by Old River Bridge walking on the railway.
Unnamed person run over by an engine whilst crossing Yarm Lane.
Robert Stevenson, another one, run over by a stone wagon which was going to be left by a train drawn by an engine and on which he had been riding, and leapt off on the front to catch the forward train, besides Preston.
Armstrong, plate layer, run over beside Shildon when one engine was going up and the other coming down.
Unnamed person by merchandise train by Darlington, relation to William Lister.
Unnamed person by wagons at Stockton.
3rd of August 1839, Thomas Brown leading wagons for Mr. Wyam, Arrow engine with coach train near Aycliffe Lane.
19th of October 1839, Thomas Green, servant of Mr. Fowles, driving 3 horses and a cart across Gisborough Lane, was run over by the Raby Castle coach engine, a deodand on the coach engine of £1,400.
1st November 1839, John Phillips, publican at Yarm, walking down the way near Early Nook, was knocked down and run over by the first-class train.
Of course, the railway went on to have more accidents. Take a look at any old newspaper, especially coroner's inquests listed there. Here you will find Durham Chronicle, Friday 26th of May 1848. An inquest was held in the schoolroom, Black Boy Colliery, near Bishop Auckland, on the 23rd instance, before William Trotter, Esquire, on the body of William Finlay. It appears that the deceased, who was employed on the Black Boy Branch Railway on the 22nd inst, was drawing some empty coal wagons out of the sidings with a horse. He had placed the wagons on the main line and then went into the sidings to bring a third. When he had drawn this wagon near to the other 2, he took the horse out. And as he was coming out, the wagon caught him and crushed him between it and the others on the chest. The deceased was immediately taken home and only survived a few minutes. He was about 26 years of age. The jury returned verdict of accidentally killed.
January 1851. Robert MacLeod, aged about 7, was killed on the incline when he was run over by wagons heading towards the lime kilns.
And the victims were not just human. Farm animals had a tendency to get run over. On 29th January 1830, the subcommittee agreed to pay a Mr. Stevenson £3 for the loss of a foal killed on the Bristleton Incline Plain.
On the 15th of September 1836, a horse belonging to Ralph Alcock was killed at Spout Lane by turning out before the wagons. The committee minutes are full of such references.
As an aside, one of the reasons the S&DR is the start of the modern railway is because it was designed to carry anything for a fee, as opposed to mineral railways that generally carried a limited range of freight. Well, one reference in the company minutes dates to the 9th of December 1831, when Timothy Hackworth received a sum of money from Thomas Cree, possibly a relative of the late John Cree, to allow a funeral to pass along the railway.
Engines could also explode without killing anyone, as the Globe did in Middlesbrough in 1839. It exploded through lack of water just outside the station on North Street, damaging several windows in the Exchange building. An adjacent ironmonger shop was also damaged.
When Hackworth designed this engine in 1830, he included safety railings for the drivers and firemen operating the engine. Safety concerns would of course gradually increase. Even smoking was banned in and upon passenger coach trains in 1838, the habit considered unpleasant and unsafe.
This newspaper report from the Shields Daily Gazette, dated the 12th of March 1883, reminds us how shocking railway accidents were. It's from a stretch of disused railway line near to where I live, and I walk along it every day. It was built by the Stockton and Darlington Railway under the auspices of the South Durham and Lancashire Union Railway. On Saturday morning, a man named George Gibson, employed at the Cat Castle Quarries, met with a shocking death on the South Durham and Lancashire Union Railway, about 400 yards west of Lartington Station. Deceased was standing on the 6 feet way, leaning on a shovel, apparently watching the approach of a double mineral train from T-Bay. Meanwhile, the fast goods from Barnard Castle approached and caught Gibson. He was thrown on the 4 feet way, and several wagons passing over him, his head was completely severed from the trunk. The mutilated remains were conveyed to Lartington Station to await an inquest. Now, I happen to know the people who live in Lartington Station, and I also happen to know they'll be listening to this. I'm just wondering how they feel about that.
This has been rather sad, and maybe a bit gory. But why should we only remember the Huskinsons of this world? You shouldn't have to be a top hat wearer to be remembered. Hopefully, we have shone a little light on the everyday folks who have come a cropper and whose deaths ultimately led to greater safety precautions which help to protect us today.
Stars of the SNDR.
Our stars of the S&DR this month are the Greener family, or at least just those who were enginemen on the inclines. For this, I'm relying heavily on the detailed research by Thomas Walker, who has written a book, 3 Greeners of Etherley and a Model Steam Engine. This book is available from the Friends of the S&DR website and has much more detail about lots of Greeners and a lovely little model winding steam engine that came into Tom's ownership. Do buy a copy because there's a lovely little twist at the end, and also because in doing so, you support the Friends of the Stockton and Darlington Railway.
So let's start with Thomas Greener. Thomas was born on the 11th of January, 1786, in Benton Square, Killingworth, near Newcastle. This was a square of houses occupied by pitmen. He served a 7-year apprenticeship as a carpenter at South Shields, then 14 years at sea, continuing his trade as a carpenter. He returned to dry land and married Mary Lyle in St Andrew's Church, Newcastle upon Tyne, on the 31st of January, 1816.
We know a little about Thomas Greener's personality from John Glass, who wrote a short booklet about him in 1875. Thomas was long dead by then, but Glass had known him. He said of Thomas,
He was a man of ready wit and jocular disposition, and could entertain the workmen at the dinner hour or at intervals of refreshment and relaxation in a very humorous and exhilarant way. Being an old British sailor, he could spin a yarn to any extent about seafaring life, naval exploits, shipwrecks, and the perils and dangers of the tempestuous ocean. He was a man of limited stature, compared with some of the stalwart navvies, but was of a hasty disposition and very irritable when he received any real or imaginary provocation, and sometimes excited such angry feelings as were not desirable.
just as well he didn't have access to social media then.
Indeed.
Once settled in England, Thomas was put in charge of the winding engine at Coopen Colliery near Blythe in Northumberland. It was probably about this time that Thomas got to know George Stephenson, who was working at Killingworth. Once Stephenson was employed by the S&DR, first to survey an alternative route suitable for locomotives in 1821, secondly to oversee the construction of the line, he called on the skilled people he had worked with near Killingworth, and Thomas Greener was one of those men.
Thomas was allegedly present at the laying of the first rail on the 23rd of May 1822, but the first direct evidence of him working on the construction of the lines dates to the 12th of February 1825, when he was paid 1 shilling and 5 a day for laying branches to Etherley Colliery, laying ballasting, footpaths, cutting and breaking stones for 114 2/3 yards. In total he was paid £8, 2 shillings and 5, suggesting that he was employed for 19 weeks, assuming a 6-day working week. Over this period, he was involved in the construction of the vast embankment on the north side of Etherley Incline, which was needed to carry the line over a small stream.
Once construction works were nearing completion, Thomas was employed as engineer to take charge of the stationary engine at the summit of the Etherley Incline. Again, John Glass gives us a little more detail. He was well qualified for the employment not only for the working part, which was very important, but for the repairing and keeping the complicated machinery in good working order. He was also very particular in having the polished work kept shining bright and the floor kept very clean. This beautiful engine was often visited by ladies and gentlemen in the neighbourhood who mostly expressed their great satisfaction at this masterpiece of human skill and the interesting conversation of the engineer. Being of an ingenious turn, he always found some employment during the intervals that the engine was not working. He made a small wagon to travel up a short incline to indicate the position of the wagons in the bank, which was a very useful thing to have in the dark. He took great delight in painting pictures and portraits and had the walls of the engine house decorated with peculiar paintings of local characters, not always to the satisfaction of the persons concerned.
So the engine house and the house where the Greener family lived were obviously at the top of Etherley Incline. You can still walk along the incline and you will see evidence of the two ponds that fed water for the engine to run, and you will also be able to see from the public footpath the orchard planted by the Greeners, although that may have been the next generation.
Tragically, you will not be able to see the actual house where Thomas Greener adorned the walls with mischievous cartoons, because it was demolished by Teesdale District Council in the 1980s. This is one of those unnecessary demolitions that should never have taken place, as there were options to save the building, options which the council ignored in its rush to demolish. Are we still bitter about this? You bet we are. While subsequent occupiers would undoubtedly have painted or papered over the walls, I'll bet those cartoons would have survived below.
Thomas was paid 22 shillings a week for his work running the stationary engine on the incline, and he also employed a nephew, again called Thomas, who later went on to become a railroad iron inspector in Merthyr Tydfil, Glamorgan. That young Thomas, aged then about 13, was paid 12 shillings a week.
The early years of the S&DR were characterised by the company often changing how it paid its employees. They experimented with direct employment, subcontracts, different terms and conditions. These changes were largely driven by a desire to save money for the railway company.
Within 5 months, Thomas's pay was changed to a per ton hauled at the rate of 1.5 pence per ton, which on average resulted in a pay increase of £20 a month. However, from this amount, Greener had to pay out expenses such as payment of the assistants and firemen's wages, supplying his own coal, tallow, hemp, etc. I'm not sure this was such a great deal, as the amount of tonnage hauled wasn't always within the control of the engineman. Ropes could snap and need replacing, but more erratically, bad weather could prevent coal being loaded onto the ships at the port in Stockton, and that resulted in bottlenecks, bringing the inclines to a halt.
However, the railway company clearly thought he was now being paid too much and changed it back to 3 shillings and 8 pence per day from September 1826, with the assistants receiving their own pay. By then, the assistants were still nephew Thomas, but also Thomas's brother John and blacksmith William Earnshaw.
Thomas's wife Mary had moved down with him once the house was ready, but she died on the 12th of August 1827 and was buried 3 days later at the church in St. Helen, Auckland. They never had children.
About this time, Thomas left his post at Etherley and handed over the engineman's role to his brother John. It is not clear why he left. Glass suggests it was due to the death of his wife, and indeed a letter survives from Thomas, dated 22nd August 1827, to Richard Otley of the railway company, expressing some dismay that he's being asked to leave his house on the incline by the end of August, only days after he had buried his wife. This would mean leaving the house before he had left his post. Instead, he asked to be allowed to stay to assist in the handover to less experienced younger men. He also explained that he hadn't yet found time to find another place to stay due to the recent trying circumstances, namely,
I have last week buried, after a lingering illness, one of the best of women, and you, sir, have known a loss equal to mine, and only such can tell the feelings of the bereaved husband. I have watched her for 17 weeks, with many a sleepless night, and my own constitution, which is not naturally robust, hath greatly yielded to its late fatigues. I am at this time greatly indisposed from a pain in my breast, which affects my left shoulder and arm. I wish not on these conditions to withdraw from my scene of misery and distress, which for some time in this place I have partook, largely by misfortune and death. I have a view of doing a little more this spot, and can adjust them after dark at nights if agreeable to the committee's wish, and I say it, I have never been an unfaithful servant or an unfortunate one on the concern. I was entertained little doubt of them complying with this small request. P.S. I beg pardon for this intrusion. I will be obliged to send it by post. If you could send me an answer by the same, it will ever oblige your humble servant, till death. Thomas Greener.
So the letter is about when he would be required to leave his house, but it isn't clear that he was being forced to leave his job. More than the decision to leave the job had already been taken, and now the house had to be vacated. Poor Thomas simply hadn't had time to organise this.
Thomas remarried Thomasine Williamson from Hynton on the 18th of June 1828. Thomasine would have been about 43. At that time, he was still living locally.
His friendship with George Stephenson, who was now chief engineer for the Liverpool and Manchester Railway, may have created other opportunities. Stephenson appointed Greener during 1828 or 1829 to survey and lay the track across the immense peat bog of Chat Moss. Greener worked under the then resident engineer, also a former S&R person, John Dixon. The S&R would see Greener and Dixon again, however. In December 1830, Greener returned for the opening of the Middlesbrough branch line, where he was put in charge of the engine and machinery which lifted coals from the staithes on the riverside to awaiting ships. These staithes, designed by Timothy Hackworth, were the terminus to the new branch line.
Thomas later went on to work on the construction of the Whitby and Pickering Railway in Yorkshire, which opened on the 26th of May, 1836. This was another Stephenson-designed line, and one that was the first railway on which the electric telegraph worked. And one of Thomas's nephews, John Henry Greener, was engaged in forming this electric communication.
Thomas was a bit of a poet. He wrote a small volume of poems and songs principally in praise of locomotives. They are very long, and we simply don't have time to read even one poem or song. I'm not sure they have passed the test of time, but you can read two of the poems in Tom Walker's book. Greener moved to London and was involved in the construction of the London and Croydon Railway, which opened on the 5th of June 1839, and then the London and Blackwall Railway, which opened on the 4th of July 1840. He was also inspector for this latter railway and engineer to the Brentford Royal Brewery of Sir Felix Booth.
Thomas died of paralysis on 16th of January 1853 and was buried in Tower Hamlets Cemetery in London. By the time of his death, he owned a number of properties and land around Tower Hamlets and Bromley. His wife, Thomasine, lived for another 8 years, dying at the home she shared with her husband, Greenfield Cottage, York Road, Stepney. It still exists.
Back to his little brother John, who had taken over the running of the engine on Etherley Incline when Thomas left around 1827-8. John was born in 1790 and he married Elizabeth Marley at Long Benton on the 22nd of June 1816. They had 7 children. When he moved to Etherley, he didn't live on site, but at Toft Hill until after his brother Thomas left to follow George Stephenson.
Sadly, his wife Elizabeth died, almost certainly as a result of childbirth, on the 14th of November 1833. She joined the other Greeners in St Helens Churchyard.
John was a staunch Wesleyan, and in 1829 he was one of a group of friends who were present at the opening of the new Wesleyan chapel at Quarry Head, Toft Hill. It has since been demolished. The stone from this chapel was incorporated into a new chapel built in 1861. John was a Sunday school superintendent in the original chapel and also a class leader. His class included 4 of his own children, as well as other extended family members. He signed the Pledge of Abstinence of the Etherley Temperance Society in April 1834.
John continued as engineman at Etherley Incline until his untimely death, as we've already heard. At 8 in the morning on the 20th of February 1843, he fell under one of the beams of the engine while it was in motion and he was killed. He joined his wife in the churchyard at St Helen, Auckland. Their gravestone says, "The memory of the just is blessed."
The Greeners provided other enginemen. Nicholas Greener was described as an engineman in the 1841 census when he lived at Toft Hill. He was Sunday school superintendent of Etherley Chapel in 1840-41 and 1842-43. He married Jane Madison in 1844. He was running the Black Boy Incline on the Black Boy branch from at least 1851.
He was nephew to John Greener, the engineman at Etherley, killed in 1843. Nicholas Greener's son John took over the role after Nicholas's death and was possibly the last engineman to be employed before the engine at Black Boy was disposed of in 1874.
So the Greener family had a strong association with the Stockton and Darlington Railway inclines, and this was largely thanks to George Stephenson, who first introduced them to the S&DR and invited them down from Killingworth. On now with this month's news.
On the 1st of January, the nation joined in with a whistle up. Did you take part? Heritage railways, modern railways and individuals blew their whistles to mark 2025 and the 200th anniversary of modern railway travel.
I saw Tanfield did quite a lot on that day.
Yes.
Were you there?
Yes, I was. They had 8 engines, 5 steam engines and 3 diesel engines, all blowing whistles and horns.
That's amazing.
And quite a big crowd there as well. Yeah.
Did you do anything, Archie?
I didn't personally do anything other than watch a little video of yourself and your family blowing some whistles outside your house.
Well, yes, those of us who haven't actually got a steam engine, Niall and I and our bunkers neighbours from across the road stood outside at midday on the 1st of January and blew whistles, honked horns and just generally made an almighty racket. I don't know what people thought who were driving past, but we did our bit.
Many of you will have seen the replica locomotion number 1 built in 1975 over the Christmas period at Hopetown. It is heading off now to continue being prepared for its return to live rail in September. You can find out more by visiting the SD200 website.
On the 14th of January at Banktop Station in Darlington, an Azuma was renamed Darlington and given a new livery for 2025, which consists of images inside the word Darlington, and the images are of the town, and of course the Railway 200 logo is also on the train. The event was organised by LNER, and they really looked after us. Lots of amazing music too from Sam Slatcher and the Darlington Choir.
Organisations are gradually advertising their events for this year. There will be 30 different places hosting S&DR events throughout the festival, which kicks off with an opening ceremony at Kinrin on the 29th of March.
You will soon be able to find all the details in one place at SDR200, although the fringe events are not so easy to find at the moment. They should be available very soon. The best thing to do is sign up for the festival newsletter by going to the website and click on About Us, then Newsletter. If you sign up, they'll keep you in touch with events, and we will, as always, put links in the show notes.
One of those events coming up soon is a showing of Iron and Steam, the dawn of the Stockton and Darlington Railway, which is a film by Lonely Tower. It will be shown on Saturday the 22nd of February 2025 in the main hall of Shildon's Railway Institute from 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
By spring, the S&DR walking and cycling route should be open, at least in County Durham. and that will include augmented reality games that will help you explore the line. Meanwhile, more of the walking route has gone in to previously inaccessible land on the south part of the Etherley Incline. This was a tricky section, not least because access had to be negotiated, because it had become a wildlife haven. So a lot of thought went into the delicate balance between creating the walking route and not disturbing wildlife that had set up home there.
Angela and I have been working on the S&AR Invention Challenge from Little Inventors, where children between the ages of 8 and 12 will use their creativity and imagination to invent a new and innovative vision of future rail travel. We've been attempting to create a series of short 1-minute videos which will explore the S&AR and set out challenges for young inventors. This has been very amusing. I have a whole new respect for people who walk, talk and handle a selfie stick at the same time.
Tom Walker, who has written the book on the Greeners from Etherley, will be giving a talk at the Railway Institute in Shildon on June 18th. He'll have with him the little steam winding engine that we referred to earlier, and hopefully he will have it in steam.
It's well worth going to that if you haven't seen it before. I had a meeting at Raby Castle recently to discuss a forthcoming exhibition based on their archives. Raby Castle was home, or at least one of them, to the Earl of Darlington, who opposed the railway. There are lots of tales about him, including the one where he tried to bring down Backhouse's bank in June 1819, which was the bank for the S&AR. The archivists there are working on an exhibition about the Raby estate and the railway, which will be part of the festival and be open sometime in the school summer holidays. Despite going through the archives, and they're still working on them, they can find nothing about this story, nor does the whole evil plot seem to be in character for the Earl. So if you want to find out how they got on uncovering the truth of this tale, you'll need to go to Raby Castle in the summer and see what they uncovered.
By the time you hear this, our magnificent pictorial guide to the Stockton and Darlington Railway, 1825 to 2025, will be at the printers and binders. If you subscribed, we are looking at the end of February when we will be posting them out. If you didn't subscribe, it will be on sale about the same time.
A revised guided walk booklet, the Darlington Circular, will probably also be at the printers by the time you listen to this. It's another cracker. A short urban walk, beginning and ending at Hopetown and packed with things to see.
We're about to advertise for our business development post with the Friends of the Stockton and Darlington Railway. This is a full-time post designed to help us move forward with a long-term post-2025 legacy of conservation, interpretation and care for the Stockton and Darlington Railway. This is possible because of a grant from the National Heritage Lottery Fund. Look out for adverts in specialist historic building and archaeology newsletters, charitable organisations, rail heritage groups, social media and our website.
And thanks to the Heritage Lottery Fund, part-time secretary Jonathan is now being moved from 1 day a week to 3 days. You'll remember Jonathan from our podcast on how the S&AR influenced development of American railroads. This is a great relief because many of us are working 10 days a week, or so it seems, and Jonathan can now help us out even more.
The same grant will also help us to commission a conservation management plan, which will be the policy guide and do list for all key partners in managing, interpreting and protecting the S&AR after 2025. Not just the physical remains, but also assets associated with it, such as archives. So while we're all gearing up for 2025, we are already planning what comes next.
The Friends of the Stockton and Darlington Railway have been nominated for a King's Award for Voluntary Service. Hooray! We have an initial assessment with Dame Della Smith towards the end of February and presumably several other hoops to jump through before a decision is made on whether we should receive an award. Wish us luck.
Tales from the Rails. This podcast is brought to you by the Friends of the Stockton and Darlington Railway, a registered charity set up to safeguard and promote the heritage of the railway that got the world on track. You can join us by visiting our website at www.str1825.org.uk.
Okay, folks, so are you ready for something completely different? As we mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, we thought we would bring you some fails from the rails. Caroline did mention that this would be a short section because we're so good at producing very professional podcasts, but might be a little bit longer than she hinted at. So if you're doing... No, I won't say that bit now because there's no point, is there? What a great start.
What did we just put to
No, what I'll do is I'll say that bit first and then I'll do the little bit that I just did. Oh boy, here we go. Well, no better way to start a fail than we goes in with a complete and utter failure. Right, and now for something completely different, or if you've been doing the post-production of a podcast, probably something all too familiar. We thought we'd conclude this series for you with some fails from the rails, as Caroline mentioned at the beginning of the podcast. She did say that this would be a short section, but you may find it goes on a little bit longer than that. When we set out to create the series, being relatively inexperienced podcasters, we realised immediately that a script was a way to a tight, professional-sounding production. Is it me next?
I thought we were taking turns on the paragraphs.
Sometimes all the planning in the world can be let down by, well, a lack of planning.
And I'm managing editor of Southwest Durham News, a small and... Jesus Christ. Mute that. You told me to do that before. Oh dear. God. And I'm... Oh, let's start this again from my name is Caroline Hardie.
Right. My name is Caroline Hardie.
And my name is Archie MacKay.
I'm an archaeologist and the editor.
We've got that bit.
Right, this is hopeless. Oh, it's just gone wrong.
I'll do it.
Right, okay. Right. My name is Caroline Hardie.
And my name is Archie MacKay.
But we obviously got better at this sort of thing in time, so that by episode 7...
Oh, no. Honest to God, I've been away for 2 weeks and I've got no idea what I'm doing.
Did you leave something behind?
Yes, my brain. Right, here we go. Anyway, back to episode 1, where sometimes fails are unavoidable. Or is it avoidable? Although unexpected and unavoidable delays have been attended, Here we go. Although unexpected and avoidable delays have attended the labours of your committee...
It's unavoidable delays.
Did I say unavoidable?
You said avoidable.
Did I?
Which is altogether different. Right, I'm going to, while we're having a cue on here, I'm going to change these headphones because they keep falling off my head.
Do they? You can tighten though, can you?
I was trying to, but oh God, maybe I've got a really tough small head. Right, anyway, just right. Starting again.
Although unexpected and
Look, they might have thought there were avoidable delays, but they couldn't say so in the committee minutes. Here we go. This right. Fails from the rails is doing well so far.
No. Right. Although unexpected and unavoidable delays... I'm going to start again. I should have read this a wee bit more, so that I can just get the flow of it better. Although unexpected and unavoidable delays have attended the labours of the committee, they have at length the pleasure of congratulating you in the completion of the main line of your railway and the Darlington and Yarm branches. Your committee have steadily proceeded in the execution. Committed to the charge through great unforeseen difficulties. Then these people stop for a wee second and they trust that ere long the public will duly appreciate the advantages of your undertaking. Right, okay, let's try again.
One thing is for sure, just like running a railway, sobriety is a must.
Attention to the sobriety and decorum with which they... Attention to the propriety and... This is a serious section, come on. As amusing as all this is, it's a bit... As amusing as all this is, it's a bit of one-way traffic, and I'm a big fan of equality. So here's Caroline bailing.
Today's Tales from the Rails will be concentrating on the importance of the Stockton and Darlington Railway. No, it won't. That's my earlier version.
I had a hearty laugh at that. Thankfully, since it was just about the only time I was able to enjoy a bit of schadenfreude.
So, into episode 2 and the serious matter of the importance of the S&DR. It's important to be able to ride out these fails. But when you can't finish reading about cycleways without falling over...
So, more footpaths and cycleways... God, jeez. It's all getting too much for one of us, but for the one writing the script, it appears she can't get enough of these fails. Why else would you write 2 TOO and 2 TO next to each other? Judge for yourself whether the snigger you hear during the lengthy pause is one from someone a reporter of the time might call an evil-disposed person. The constituency MP has been spreading the word too. No, too. We got too. We've got to get some bloopers in for our, what are they called?
Yeah, fails from the rails.
Fails from the rails. Yeah, there's my first fail from the rail today. And in case you're wondering, that wasn't a tut you heard at the end. Well, not entirely. That was what we experienced professionals in the industry call click editing. You make a mistake, so you make a clicking noise to create a spike on the sound wave, which in turn makes it easier to spot and edit errors in post-production. And believe me, there are more than a few clicks in each of these episodes. Anyway, she's not infallible, so let's have a listen to another Caroline fail.
It's important to note that while England had no cities, England... Oh.
Yep, that's literally it. That's all she's giving me. Yep, you heard right. This was the episode where Caroline introduced a new post-production sound to the editing suite. Booping, rather than clicking, was to help me identify where I had to insert a jingle. Remember when I mentioned planning? Well, we're 3 episodes in now, and someone has forgotten to load up the jingles ahead of recording. Episode 3 was also the one where Niall Hammond joined us as a guest. Niall is, of course, Caroline's husband, and so what could possibly go wrong?
In April 1835, when the company commissioned the repainting of the S&Dr's buildings between Aycliffe Lane and Fighting Cocks, the Aycliffe Lane Inn, as it was called, was specifically named, its front door to be painted grained oak. A little hint there on the decorative scheme that we might put in place if we managed to buy and restore the building.
Helicopter going past.
Well, getting everything thrown at us today, aren't we? One thing we're missing is a bloody steam train.
Yeah.
So it's not the police hovering overhead, pursuing somebody for half an hour.
Oh, the start of World War III.
I know. Oh, God. Well, I'm not going to bother finishing this podcast if it's the start of World War III.
So I think we might just do that bit again.
We'll wait until it's gone.
Until it goes. So they do go past you occasionally, but rarely. But today,
when we first got Cleo, she just everything was to be chased. And there was a helicopter went over the village, and you try and chase in the helicopter.
Yeah, she loved a helicopter. Helicopters and squirrels.
Maybe there's news there, Archie. Get out there, quick.
I'm like supposed to be on a newspaper. It's a serious helicopter activity.
If you want to go and look out the window and be a journalist for a minute, do it.
Being unable to be in two places at once, this intrepid journalist never did find out what that was all about.
Well, onwards and upwards to episode 4. And we're becoming highly experienced by now, learning all the jargon.
And indeed the second phase of the Industrial Revolution, when... Oh, I've forgotten what the noise is that we make. The theme of this episode was one in which certain noises were forgotten, like how to speak.
The decking from the late 19th century has also been removed as the extra 3...
Spit it out. Or when managing to speak, how to do it properly.
His sons... I'm going to do that again because I've just misspoken. For a cheat. It very rarely happens.
In episode 5, we invited along Dr. Michael Bailey, an expert in the history of locomotion number 1, but not the Eiffel Tower, according to Cleo.
It was just the year that the Eiffel Tower was built. Sorry.
We may have to redo that bit again. Cleo, that's the first time you've actually ever said anything in one of these podcasts. Sit down. There's a bell on a door outside. It's not meant to go, and it's obviously gone. So, Cleo, sit down.
Actually, as Caroline rightly pointed out, it was the door alarm that triggered Cleo. Dr. Michael is as well informed about the Eiffel Tower as he is of locomotion number 1. At this point, we skip an episode. Episode 6 was in the main constructed of several outside interviews recorded by Caroline. As it happens, I actually had COVID at the time, but the raw files of this episode I couldn't find. One can only begin to imagine the number of catastrophic fails that have conveniently gone missing. So, on to episode 7, and I don't want to create any false impressions about Caroline's extracurricular activities, but her analogy in this observation certainly raised a few eyebrows.
Just take a minute. We're all breathing very heavily. It's,
Sorry, I think
the comment
was something.
Really? It's going to sound like a porn movie.
Sorry, it's a good job I can't hear that voice.
There is lots of breathing going on.
Have a bit of deep breathing. By episode 8, it was time to turn to drink. Thankfully, it was an episode on celebrations. However, as mentioned earlier, drinking and podcasting don't mix.
So we have publicly accessible processions, flag waking. So we have public... Blaming all these celebrations.
So we have a cough. And we've woken up our flags.
I'm plastered already.
And for those who don't know, and I'm sure they do, plastered is a good Scottish colloquialism for significantly inebriated.
Of course, too many celebrations can also lead to a lot of falling over your words and general confusion.
Was there a difference between the opening day celebrations and subsequent commemorations since the... Was there a difference between the opening day celebrations and subsequent commemorations once the S&DR didn't...
Spit it out, man!
Was there a... Am I asking you this question?
You are.
Right.
You can ask somebody else, but there's nobody else in the room.
There may have been no one else in the room, but as in our helicopter episode earlier, that doesn't mean there wasn't anyone outside.
Maynell recognised the...
What's that noise? It stopped when you did something.
It's outside. I think they're air blowing leaves or something.
Do you know, they're such a waste of the planet's resources. Get a brush, sweep them up.
What are they doing? I think that's what they're doing. It's probably something to do with leaves. Yeah.
I had to listen to this when I was on holiday in Greece as well. I've been followed by leaf blowers.
Yeah, so he's doing.
Oh,
He's coming close up to Phil and doing
dear God.
a job. It's just the water it is.
It's pointless, because if you don't pick them up, the wind just blows them back again.
Yeah. There's somebody could go background down about a podcast either. Right, I'll start this paragraph again. I wish it'd show up though, but it's not going to.
It's Hackworth Park there. You could go in there for a few minutes, let us finish. Right, anyway, yes, cracking on.
Well, a month later, we were back for episode 9 after successfully wading through piles of freshly scattered leaves. As you can picture, we all wear headphones while recording, but that doesn't stop Caroline mishearing when her favourite subject almost crops up again.
Poem on the village.
What's on the village?
Poem on the village.
I thought you said something else.
No.
Our guests for this show were Dave Reynolds of the Shildon Railway Institute, who you just heard trying to get Caroline's mind back on track. Joining him was Jane Hackworth-Young, great-great-granddaughter of the most famous son of Shildon and the S&DR, Timothy Hackworth. So it only seems fitting that arguably the best fail of the series was delivered by Jane, straight into the welcoming mind of Caroline, which David had clearly failed to get back on the rails.
Well, John Wesley Hackworth had chaffered nuts since he was a child of 5 years old in Soho Works, which was Timothy Hackworth's own works. And so he grew up really learning from his father, everything his father was doing. And his father, Robert... Why have I got... What's that? What happened?
Nothing.
I'm so sorry.
She's gone into hysterics.
Just some launched in and said John Wesley and chaffered nuts.
John Wesley had what?
Chaffered nuts. And it's like medical condition. I'm so sorry to lower the tone. I thought I had it under control, but then I just lost it.
I've got it.
Right, let's go back to... Shall we start with John's story again?
Yes, you will start with John Wesley.
Yeah.
Honestly, we're on episode 10 now, and rather than clean up our act, the fails are becoming even more X-rated.
Phew, well, and soon we were on penultimate episode. And thankfully, everything has gone absolutely perfectly today, so we can reach the end of the line of fails with episode 11's Spectacular. Angela, who has joined us again today, was here to help Caroline record an episode about women of the S&DR. I headed into the kitchen to wash the dishes and make the tea, while esteemed ever-present host discovered that you can only find a door alarm amusing so many times, although its aftermath was still able to tickle our guest presenter. There's only one way to end this chapter on bloopers. Over to you, Caroline.
The Adamsons were not listed, so it looks like they were no longer involved in running the passenger service. Oh, look it.
Click, click, click.
Well, that's the end of the line for us. It has been fun. I think we'd all love to continue with the podcasts if we didn't have so much else on. Actually, it is a lot of hard work generating the content and then editing. But it's a really interesting job to do, and I've certainly enjoyed saying I'm a podcaster. What about you two? Do you introduce yourself in that way?
Well, yeah, I suppose no harm, especially nowadays, introducing yourself as being a podcaster. I think it sounds almost as good as calling yourself a broadcaster nowadays, doesn't it?
Well, I'm only a newbie to it, but yeah, can add it to the CV.
Yeah. Well, we've had about 3,000 downloads in total. Obviously, most of those have been in the UK, but we are delighted that our audience can also be found in the United States, the Netherlands, Australia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, France, Italy and Japan.
Our most popular podcast was the one on Locomotion number 1 with Michael Bailey.
So thank you to everyone who has listened wherever you are in the world. Please share the links far and wide of our podcasts, not just this one, but the other 11 too. They'll continue to be available to everyone long after 2025.
Thanks to Tom Walker for his research into the Greeners, and an acknowledgement once more that this and many other podcasts have been made possible by people who have researched the railway: George Smith, the late Brendan Boyle, Jonathan Ratcliffe, Dave Reynolds, Jane Hackworth-Young, Michael Bailey, Anthony Cools, Sophie Vora, and Chris Lloyd.
Thank you also to our voices, all the people who agreed to be interviewed or were cajoled into co-presenting, and to actor Lee Morris, who also represented the voices from the past, and to Alfie Nixon, who did some voice work for us.
And Dave Reynolds, who wrote our theme tune, which gets our toes tapping and headphones nodding at the start of every podcast.
Looking ahead, we agreed at the outset that we might do a one-off podcast during the festival. Caroline has already had an offer from the archivist of Raby Castle to participate. There is also a lot of new creative work being produced, such as songs and poems, and perhaps a one-off podcast could showcase some of that. We'll have a think and see how the year goes. Do send us your ideas, or indeed plead with us to do no more.
While we are gone, remember to subscribe to the SDR 200 newsletter, and for goodness sake, join the Friends of the S&DR. Join us properly. Don't just follow us on social media. Get onto our website, sign up, pay your subs, and receive a copy of our World on Track book.
When the celebrations stop at the end of 2025, the Friends of the Stockton and Darlington Railway will continue their work to protect, conserve and cherish the railway that got the world on track. We'll continue to protect its historic buildings and structures. We'll be there as part of the planning process to protect the remains from development. We'll be there to continue to improve access to the remains and improve their interpretation, especially for the younger generation. We'll be there to remind the world of the pioneering railway that changed everything, and we'll be there to remind politicians that a reliable, affordable, permanent public transport infrastructure is still a grand idea and could help mitigate the impacts of climate change. So why not join the Friends of the Stockton and Darlington Railway and join us for the next leg of the journey?